Good morning, FCCT. How's it going today? Good, good. It's good to see you guys all here today. It's finally getting cool out, which is fantastic. And we skipped over kind of cool, I think, and went to cold, but that's okay. Cold is better than hot. It is Pie Day, so make sure grab a pie on the way out, because who doesn't love pie? We're going to be in Psalm chapter 5 today, in verse 11, and we're starting a new sermon series today called Abundant Life. And it kind of... The reason for this sermon series is because of some things that we were doing in our midweek Bible study recently, and we were going over a scripture, and it was talking about how there's this kind of form of wisdom of do not taste, do not touch, all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't have any real power in it. And I started thinking about just kind of how I grew up as a Christian, and when I grew up in the church, that was kind of the mark of spirituality, right? It's all the things that you didn't do. And did anybody else kind of grow up in a church like that? It's all the more things you could list that you didn't do was the mark of how spiritual you were. And to the point of you don't play cards, you don't wear hats in the church, you don't wear. There was a long list of rules that were the mark of being a Christian. And the thing is that if you were really spiritual, then you gave up on joy altogether, right? Because we know that joy leads to nothing good. Just give up on joy altogether, and then you're really spiritual. In fact, the more miserable that you can be, the greater the spirituality. Yeah. And that I kind of think about my growing up, and the thing is that it's easy to go that direction. It's easy to think that there's some kind of addition by subtraction that's possible in your life. And I started thinking about Jesus and the idea that Jesus came to give us life to the full, or give us abundant life, and started thinking about what that meant. And I realized that, for a long time growing up, and even into my adult years, I still held on to this idea that somehow being life to the full was all about all these things that you took out of your life and didn't do. And I think that that's a wrong way of looking at it. And so we're going to try to recalibrate, and we're going to talk about abundant life through this sermon series. And we're going to talk about how abundant life is seeking to be filled. It's about seeking to have the fullness of God in your life. It's not about all the things that you take out of your life. It's about having more of God in your life. And when you have more of God in your life, what you find is that all these different aspects of your life become full and abundant. And so today we're going to talk about rejoicing in God, and I think that that's a really important starting point for us. And to do that, I want to tell a story, and it's a personal story. And here's the thing that, it's funny. You always have to be careful about telling stories about yourself and your life and all that kind of stuff. Now, the positive side of that is people can kind of get to know you better, and it makes maybe some more of an impact if people know that this is something that's real and close to you and things like that. The downside of telling a personal story is it can be like, come watch my home movies, but a more boring version of that, because there's not even a movie to watch. And so hopefully it's the one and not the other today. But I wanted to tell the story of my grandson, Mason. And I know I've mentioned him before, and mentioned that he has a very rare genetic disorder. He was, I think, the 65th person in the world to ever be diagnosed with it. And I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the story, because I think it has some bearing on what we're talking about today. And Mason he's a bundle of joy. He is, if you ever get a chance to meet him, I hope you do, he will make a mark. And everywhere that my son Tyler and his wife Kristen, everywhere that they go, everybody knows Mason. And he generally runs into the building, like when they go to church, he runs into church, he runs all over the church, because he has to say hello to everybody. He's got these kind of blonde curls that kind of go crazy on his head, and he's just running through the church, and hey, 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 and it's kind of like Adrian. So the thing is that everybody in the building will know him. Everybody, he experiences life to the full. Like, there's not one more ounce of joy that could be packed into his life. And it's a pretty great thing to see and watch. Now, the The thing that you have to understand about Mason is when I say that he's always happy, he's always full of joy, like literally, he's always full of joy. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't cry, because sometimes he does. And I remember being told by my son that he was one time he was asked by his mom while he was crying, like he's crying because he's really upset he didn't get something, or you know how kids are. But he was asked, "Are you sad?" You know, he's crying. And he said, "No." And she said, "Are you happy?" "Yes." And so even while he's sad, he's happy. That's how much joy is packed into his life. And he's not just, it's not just him that's happy, but he makes other people happy. And sometimes he does that inadvertently. The other day, their 3-year-old daughter, and Mason's 5, their 3-year-old daughter came home, and she came home from ballet class, and she announced that even though her name's Ella, she wanted to be called Ellie because her teacher called her Ellie, and so now she wants to be called Ellie. And so Kristen had to have a talk with her about, you know, names and identity and how important a name is. And one of the things is you have to understand when, you know, she needs to know her name so that if she's ever lost, that she tells them the right name. So it's kind of important. She needs to know, like, this is your name, this is what you're called. So there's this very serious discussion going on at the dinner table about, no, your name is Ella, and our names are important, and we were given our names by our parents, and this is very important, this is very serious. And in the background you hear, "I'm Spider-Man." And that was Mason adding his 2 cents into the discussion. So at that point, the series discussion was over. And that's just kind of how he is. And this is kind of his philosophy of life is just everything is fantastic and so full of joy. Now, the problem that comes into this is that because of the nature of his condition, he gets seizures. And it's really important to control his seizures because, you know, he's a very vibrant kid. And he has some developmental delays and some disabilities, but the future can be very bright for him. But it depends on controlling the seizures, because Kristen has talked to some families that have kids that have the same problem that Mason does, and their kids are 15 and 16 years old and can no longer walk and can no longer speak and can no longer do any of those things because just over time the seizures have robbed them of all of that in their life. And so there's a great fear, right? There's a great fear in saying, well, what happens if this happens to our son? Because he's so full of joy. What happens if that gets robbed? So this is the problem of telling a personal story. So the thing is that in the last month, he's had 20 seizures. I practiced getting through this. How do you have joy in the midst of the suffering of life? How do you have joy in the midst of the fear of life? Psalm chapter 5, verse 11 says, "But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy and spread your protection over them. That those who love you that those who love your name may exult in you." So the thing that I want to talk about today, the thing that's kind of on my mind and on my heart today, is how do you have an abundant life when life can sometimes be something less than abundant? How do you have an abundant life in the midst of the difficulties of life? How do you have an abundant life when there is loss that you experience in life? How do you have an abundant life when there's uncertainty and fear and anxiety? You know, the thing is life can be very, very difficult. It can be so hard on us. How do you do it? And we're going to look today at how you do that, because the thing is that if we can't get past this first hurdle, then how do we get to the point of having an abundant life? So we're going to talk about three things today. We're going to talk about, first of all, God isn't fair. We need to recognize that at the beginning. God isn't fair. We need to, secondly, talk about how praise completes joy. And finally, we're going to talk about not having fear. Not having fear. So let's talk about this first problem. God isn't fair. It says in Psalm 5:11 that we just read, "But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exalt in you." Now here's the thing. In this, it's talking about how if we take refuge in God, we're going to rejoice, we're going to sing for joy. But it never talks about the fact that means that we all get the same thing. It doesn't mean that we all have the same opportunities. It doesn't mean that we all have the same outcomes. It doesn't mean that we all get the same thing in life. Sometimes some people get more and other people get less. That's the way that it works. And God has set it up that way, and He set it up that way purposely. God isn't fair purposefully. But that doesn't keep us from rejoicing in God. In fact, that leads to more joy. Joy, it's said by C.S. Lewis, was the serious business of heaven. And business is good. So think about this for a second. All these passages that we have in Scripture in the New Testament about joy, these were Christians that were going through great difficulties in their life. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 4 through 7, let's read this for a second. And remember that this is being written to and by people that are being persecuted for their faith. These are people who have turned their life over to God, who have become Christians, who have accepted the reconciliation provided by Jesus Christ and His death on the cross, who have had a renewed relationship with God, right? Something that was lost in antiquity in the garden is now back to them, and so they get to experience this relationship with God, but along with that is coming immense pressure and immense turmoil. They have people that are leaving the faith. They have people that are abandoning the faith. They have people that are losing their lives because of Christ. And in the midst of this, it says in Philippians 4:4, it says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Now here's the thing. This is being written not in the comfort of our modern lives. This is being written in the crucible in the turmoil of the first century church. Do not be anxious about anything. How in the world can these Christians rejoice? And again, this burden is not spread equally among them. Some of them will face persecution that is incredibly harsh, incredibly difficult. Others won't. It's not spread out evenly, and yet they're all called to rejoice. He doesn't say, look, if you've been spared this persecution, by all means rejoice and be thankful to God. But if you've experienced this persecution, well then, obviously you have a reason to be upset. Now here's the thing, this unfairness of God is a source of a lot of irritation for us, isn't it? We were just talking today about, somebody was talking about going to Costco, to the gas station at Costco. I don't know why anybody would do such a thing. Save money, yeah. I don't know, the aggravation. And they were talking about how when they go to the gas station at Costco, they always pick the longest line. How many of you guys can relate to that? Right? It's not fair, is it? Because that's the thing that happens. Whether you're in the grocery store line, whether you're in the, Costco, the regular line to get out of checking out at Costco, or you're in the gas line. The thing is that life isn't fair, and that seeming unfairness can grate on us and can make us lose any joy we had. It can make us bitter and angry, upset. But this unfairness is actually built into the system for a reason. So Mason had to go to an overnight evaluation. They need to find out what's going wrong. Why is the medication, why are all the efforts that they have of keeping him from having these seizures, why is it not working? And the only time they could do it, or the soonest time they could do it, was October 31st, Halloween. And you know, when you're 5, Halloween's a pretty big deal. And so he was going to miss out on all the festivities of Halloween. And you know, he had already had his costume and all that kind of stuff. He was pretty excited about the whole thing. And what was really interesting is that I don't know how his church ended up finding out. My son and my daughter-in-law go to a great church. And so the church somehow found out that he was going to miss this. And so they said, hey, we have some people that want to help him to have a good time. And so they went to the church, and they went to the children's classrooms, and there was 30 people from their church showed up. And he got the chance to go knock on each door in the hallway, and somebody answered the door and gave him candy. And he was over the moon. He was over the moon. This was so great, right? He got to go trick-or-treating, right? Because people did that for him. If it weren't for the problem, they wouldn't exercise the solution, right? If it weren't for the need, there wouldn't be the opportunity for service. And what was really fascinating is we got the chance, you know, modern technology is great. And so we got the chance to, and you guys can, you know, look it up on Facebook, but there's video of him going around to the doors and knocking on him, and the people, oh, hey, Mason, you know, acting like they don't know who's going to be at the door, and, you know, giving him candy and stuff. But everybody had a great time. The joy of all of them was increased because there was a weakness among one of them. You see, this is what's really fascinating, is that God actually builds this problem of not being fair into the system, not so that joy will be diminished, but so that joy will be increased. Right? It's so that joy will be increased. Others can share in meeting your needs, and they can share in the joy that you have in having your needs met. God's lack of this fairness is for the increase of joy, not its diminishment. So there is purpose behind the differences. There is purpose behind the unfairness. There's an opportunity for us to love each other and to increase each other's joy. My strength serves your weakness, and your strength serves mine. It's funny because I was watching, I can't remember what show it was, but I was watching some show, and it was about this situation where people were in a survival. I don't remember if they were lost at sea. In fact, that now that I'm thinking about it, that might have been it. They were lost at sea, and there was a group of 3 people, and they talked about, the guy who wrote the book after it was all over, talked about the fact that they would take turns despairing. Right? You don't want all 3 people, like if you're in a life raft in the middle of the ocean and you hadn't seen anybody for a month, you don't want all 3 people in the boat despairing at the same time. That's not good, right? But he talked about how it just seemed to naturally occur that when somebody would despair, the other 2 were able to help them through their despair. And it wasn't because one of them was just, you know, so tough that they never despaired. No, they all went through it. But they went through it at different times. And what's interesting is it allowed them to help each other through. And they could all relate to the guy who was despairing. They weren't saying, oh man, why are you so weak? Why are you bringing us down, man? Why are you doing this to us? It was, no, we understand. But right now, we're at the point where we can help you. And you will later be at the point where you can help us. Having joy in trials and tribulations, having joy in the midst of the unfairness that you experience, actually is one of the things that brings joy to other people. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 18, it says that, what then? only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. What happens is Paul is in prison, and he's saying that you have to understand, even though I'm in prison, it's okay. Why is it okay? Because in the midst of my imprisonment, it's creating opportunities for the gospel. It's creating opportunities for love to be shown. It's creating opportunity for Christ to be revealed. And so in this, it's okay. And his strength and his joy in the midst of his imprisonment was causing people to know Christ. In the same way, when you have joy in the midst of your circumstances that might seem unfair to the world, you become an occasion for joy. I've told you guys, I've shared before that I come from a family of Eeyores. We are world-class Eeyores. I mean, some of you guys might be amateur Eeyores, but you got nothing on us, man. But that's kind of what I come from this family of Eeyores. And having a child in the family who is just like nuclear-grade joy is pretty astounding. It's amazing the effect that can have. Now, my kids, my sons, were able to be spared. They had enough of Angela's genes to be spared the Eeyore-ness. But even in my life, having Mason in my life, having that nuclear-grade joy is pretty astounding. Now, you might say, well, Mason doesn't know all the things that might happen to him in the future, and that's true. And he doesn't understand what's at stake. He doesn't understand all these things. No, he doesn't. But he does understand having seizures. He has them. And he does understand. He's got a part-time job going to doctors. He understands all of that, and yet in the midst of all that, he can have joy. And that joy is an amazing quality that shared with others becomes overwhelming. Secondly, let's look at this. Praise completes joy. It says, but let all who take refuge in you, and that take refuge is important because, again, you don't take refuge in God unless there's some problems, unless life isn't always completely fair, right? If life is unfair, you at some point take refuge in God. But then it says, let them ever sing for joy, right? The thing that's important for us to understand is that praise completes joy. And what's really interesting is that God calls us to joy, and God calls us to praise Him. God calls us to sing out or to give voice to our praise to Him. And that seems like a burden. Now, how many of you guys have ever had that worker, you go to work, and there's that worker who's just way too happy in the morning? You know what I'm talking about? That worker who's way too happy. How many of you guys have had that before? And you're like, it's way too early for that. It's way, stop, you're too much. It's over. Like some of you live with that person, huh? Yeah, you have our condolences. But the thing is that, sometimes it can be a burden. Or what's even worse is when you have that job. And I don't know if you've ever had one of these, but there's that morning meeting. They call everybody in the morning to a meeting, and they're like, there's that manager that's trying to get everybody pumped up. And they're like, oh, we're going to do this today, and this is our goal for the day, and you're like, oh, man, enough. How many of you guys have ever experienced that, where they're trying to they're trying to get you to be joyful? Does that help? For most of us, it doesn't, does it? It doesn't always help us. And so the thing that's interesting is that kind of what's happening here with God? Is God like, hey, you need to rejoice in me. You need to praise me. And basically, it's this counterproductive way of God trying to make us happy. Because we all know as Christians, we're going to be miserable, right? Is that what's going on here? No. Because that's the farthest thing from the truth. The thing is that there's a truth that God has baked into the system. And that truth is that joy has to be expressed to be completed. Joy has to be expressed to be completed. And we know this whether we think we know it or not. Because the thing is, have you ever been in that position where it's just something great happens and you just shout? I can still remember, I can still hear my dad's voice when he would watch hockey. He got really into hockey. And I could still hear him. I'd be in the other room. And I would know that something had great happened with this team because I'd hear this, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. It was very distinctive. It was very distinct. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. I don't know. There's always three. Woo, hoo, hoo, hoo. Two or three witnesses, I guess. But the thing is that that's what, I can still hear that. And I don't think he said to himself, hey, here's what I've come up with, right? I think it was completely involuntary. This is just what had to happen when he saw this thing of joy take place. And we know that this is the case because when something really joyful happens to you, the first thing you want to do is you want to share that. You want to express it and you want to share it. You want to express it. You want something, you jump up, you do something. You yell, something happens in your life. You want to have that joy expressed outwardly, and then you want to share and show it to other people. So there's a picture. Can you guys show that picture? Do you guys know what that is? That's Times Square, victory over Japan Day. I hate crowds. And so I look at a picture like that and I imagine being in the middle. I'm not like terrified of crowds. There's nothing wrong with me, okay? But crowds just irritate me. And I can't, I look at that and I think, why? Why would somebody do that? But it's something different when you have this inexpressible joy. Because for a lot of people, what they just learned is that they're going to live. Their loved ones are going to live. And so when you experience that, you say, well, I have to express this in some way. And you want to not only express it in some way, but you want to express it with other people. There's a camaraderie, there's a unity, there's a sense of brotherhood that takes place. The call to worship God is the call to enter into His joy. When God says, I want you to worship me, He's calling you into His joy. He's calling you to participate in His joy. He's calling you to have the joy that's in you that is a share of His joy. He's calling for you to complete that. We know this is true because we experience it all the time. We experience it without realizing we experience it because we all have groups of people that orient themselves around a shared joy in something. You might be a Star Wars fan, or you might be a Diamondbacks fan, or you might be, you know what I'm saying? There's why do those groups exist? Those groups exist because joy to be completed needs to be expressed and shared. And that's what God is calling us to. And the thing that's important for us to understand that if you don't realize that life isn't fair, God baked that in. That's actually meant to increase our joy. And that in order for your joy to be complete, you need to give a voice to it. You need to praise. You need to share that praise with others. There's no way for you guys for all of us, to live the abundant life that God desires for us. There's no way for us to live that unless we learn this. It occurred to me that old and cantankerous and bitter people are generally not the most social people in the world. Right? The phrase, get off my lawn, exists for a reason, right? It's funny because as I've gotten older, when I was younger, that's not the guy that I didn't like that guy. As I've gotten older, I've started to understand that guy a little bit more. But I also understand that that's not a good direction. That the pull towards that has to be resisted. That when you look at the Unabombers of the world and the school shooters of the world and the get off my lawn types of the world, you're not seeing people who are living an abundant life. A life that's full of joy and rejoicing. Well, finally, it's important for us to understand that there's an element of getting over fear that has to be a part of our life. The question is that in the case of my grandson Mason, is his exuberant joy foolishness in light of his predicament? As he gets older, is it going to be the case where somebody needs to clue him in that his exuberant joy is really kind of not appropriate to the situation he finds himself in? In Matthew chapter 6, verse 25 through 33, it's a little bit longer of a passage, but I think it's important. It says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they?" If you look back over your life, can you see any places, any times in your life where your fear of the future has kept you from the abundant life and the abundant joy that God desired for you? The thing is that if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of times that's exactly what robs us of our joy. Right? And again, I'm not trying to make this sermon about my family or me. I think this is a useful illustration. But the thing is that if Mason loses things in the future, should that keep him from joy now? Or does it make the joy now more reasonable? Right? The thing is that does it make it more like you have this now? You might not have it tomorrow. You might not have it in 10 years. You might not have it. You have it now. Shouldn't you enjoy it now because you have it now? Because you see, the thing that's interesting to me is that as I was thinking about this, Mason's not in the position that's any different than anybody else. We're all going to be in the place where we no longer walk and no longer talk, unless we die first. We're all going to lose what we have right now. Every one of us, if we get blessed with a long enough life, we are all going to lose what we have right now. And you can do one of two things with that knowledge. You can say, therefore, I will praise God all the more. I will experience joy all the more because I have it now. I am blessed now. Or you can say, in light of the fact I will lose it, I will be sad now. I'm going to import tomorrow's sadness to today. I'm going to double my sadness. That's one of the options that we all have. I don't know that it's the wisest choice. Because the thing that's interesting to me is that even in the midst of the difficulty, even in the midst of the things that we lose, there are opportunities for joy to take place, and there are opportunities for others to find joy in helping and serving us, as we talked about previously. I don't know that saying that because something might happen bad to me in the future, that's a good reason to not be joyful now. Today, are you blessed? Do you have blessing today? Well, then let's have some joy. It's become clear to me that abundant joy and the abundant life that comes from it requires faith. Has Jesus been good to me? Has He given me something good? I might at some point in the future lose that good thing. Does that negate the blessing today? And will that loss somehow then make the future where I get that restored even more joyful? How many of you guys have ever been sick? Anyone? You've experienced this then, haven't you? Do you sit around right now going, hey, I might get sick in the future. Let me go ahead and import that sadness to today. And then when you are sick, have you noticed something that when you feel better again, something is different for a short time? It's like you rejoice in those things a little bit more. You rejoice, like, I don't feel terrible today. This is fantastic. Like, you realize what a great blessing it was, because for a while you had to go without it. And one of the things that I thought about is the fact that we just take everything for granted. God gives us all these blessings, and we're so tempted to take all of them for granted, to develop such a sense of entitlement for them, that God then takes them away, not as a way to punish us, but as a way to help us have more joy in the future. Because what happens is we now realize what a great blessing we had all the time. And I think what happens is that living in abundant joy requires faith, because what you have to understand is this, is that you might miss out on some things in this life. You might lose some things in this life, and you might miss out on them or lose them for a significant portion of time. But what if that makes the eternity where those things get restored that much more full of joy for you? Would that be worth it? Would it be worth it to say, well, I have an eternity of just really appreciating this thing in a way that other people might not? Because I didn't have that for a while. The question really is for us, can we trust Christ enough that if we do have things taken away from us for a while, can we trust enough that it's not only for our more abundant joy in the future, but for others' more abundant joy now? We have to ask ourselves these questions. Has Jesus begun a good work in me? Is he faithful to complete it? Can Jesus turn my loaves and fish, the small amounts of what I have to offer in my life, the talents that I have and the abilities that I have, can Jesus turn those efforts, those small, meager efforts that I put into trying to raise my family and trying to bless my community, can Jesus turn those things into a banquet? Is Jesus' grace sufficient for me? Does he go to prepare a place for me? Will I enter into his joy? It's amazing how the ending can really change the whole story. Many of you probably have heard of Buster Keaton. He was an early movie actor and kind of specialized in doing all kinds of crazy stunts. In fact, a lot of the stunts that are kind of staples today, he invented those. Maybe most of you might know, but maybe some of you don't, that he actually became a performer at the age of 4 because his family was very poor, but they were performers. And his dad's alcoholism eventually is the thing that got him to leave his family act and go seek employment elsewhere, and that eventually led to him becoming a very popular and very well-known movie star. And what he found was that the more serious he was, the more people laughed, and that wasn't actually that difficult for him because his life was actually pretty difficult. He ended up getting married, and he built a small bungalow for him and his wife. It was not tiny, but it was modest. And his wife, upon seeing it, immediately started yelling at him, saying that he didn't love her and it wasn't good enough. And she demanded that he build a 10,000 square foot, basically, mansion for her, which he spent $300,000 on, only for that to not be enough, and for the relationship to eventually sour. And when she divorced him, she took the kids, and he turned to alcohol. And his life was, even though he was a well-known movie star, his life was kind of a disaster. And he ended up doing a train stunt where a real train actually goes off, this bridge collapses and the train's destroyed. And that stunt cost $42,000, which was a lot of money back then, but then the problem was that the movie flopped and he lost his ability to control his own career at that point, and his career diminished. And his life was kind of a wreck. He became an alcoholic to rival his father. And it looked like any kind of happiness in his life was over. But then what happened is that he ended up meeting somebody who appreciated him, someone who later became his wife, and something strange happened. From that time to the end of his life, his movie career was restored, and he was happy. It's amazing what can happen when we miss out on some things, and by missing out on some things, learn the value of those things, and then those things get restored to us. It's amazing to think that in the end, maybe we will be welcomed into the joy of our Master. And that means not only will we experience his joy in being the Master, but we will experience his joy in us. In Matthew 25:21, it says, his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Maybe the unfairness that we experience in life, the little that we sometimes get, is preparing us for an abundant life. And if we can have faith in that, we can start living that abundant life now. We want to believe, belong, become. We want to believe that God created us to enjoy him. We were made to enjoy God, to take joy in him, to rejoice in him. We belong to him through grace. That enjoyment of God comes not from something that we accomplish, but from something that he accomplished for us. And then we become what? We become abundantly joyful. That's the goal, the desire, is become abundantly joyful.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page, where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to his church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Hey, have a great week.